In a world not too far into the future, humanity has unlocked a discovery so powerful, so shocking, that it changes the very meaning of life itself. Science has found a way to extract and transfer time, not just hours or days but actual years of a person's life. For the rich, this discovery becomes the greatest luxury ever known. For the poor, it turns into the darkest curse. Imagine this. Wealthy men and women, looking forever young, buying decades from desperate souls who sell their own lifespans just to feed their families for another night. The rich laugh in their grand halls, living with endless youth, while the poor shrink day by day, their bodies aging faster and faster as their borrowed time is stripped away. And in the middle of this cruel divide, begins the story of one man and one woman, a family trapped inside this system. A husband who once believed he was building a better future, and a wife who will pay the most terrible price of all. This is not just a story of science. This is a story of love, of sacrifice, of betrayal, and of the war between those who own time and those who have nothing left but a ticking clock. Our journey begins with Max. Max was once an ordinary man, a worker who had slowly climbed his way up through the great corporation that controlled the time trade. For years he had been loyal, carrying out orders without question, convincing himself that what he was doing was right, that the company's promise of fairness was true. But deep inside, Max was beginning to see the truth. The corporation did not care about fairness. It cared only about profit, about taking as much as possible from the poor, and giving more and more life to the rich. Still, Max tried to hold his silence, until the day his own family was pulled into the trap. Until the day he came home to find his wife Alina, sitting quietly, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with fear. Alina had made a choice no one should ever have to make. She had sold 40 years of her own life, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other way. The bills, the hunger, the endless demands of survival, they had cornered her. And in that desperate moment, Alina had signed away almost half a century of her time. When Max saw her, he froze. Her once youthful face was now lined with sudden age. Her bright hair now streaked with silver. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, as if time itself had rushed past her in a single night. Max's heart shattered. He fell to his knees begging her. Why? Why would you do this? Why didn't you wait for me? Alina smiled faintly, though her lips trembled. For us, she whispered. For our home, for food, for our children's future. I had no choice, Max. They said if I gave them 40 years they would give us enough money to survive. And I couldn't let them take you. Her words cut deeper than any knife. Max held her shaking hands, his mind burning with rage, his soul torn between love and fury. That night, he made a silent vow. This would not be the end. If the system thought it could take his wife's years, if the corporation believed it could steal without mercy, then they would learn what it meant to face a man who had nothing left to lose. This was the beginning of rebellion. The next morning, Max walked into the towering glass building of the corporation, a place he had once entered with pride. But today the walls seemed colder, the air heavier, and every step echoed with betrayal. He looked around at the endless rows of glowing screens, displaying numbers, contracts, and the countdown of lifespans being bought and sold like items on a shelf. This was no longer business. This was theft, painted with the colors of progress. Max knew who was at the center of it all. Sophie, the CEO. A woman admired by the public as a genius, a savior, a leader. But inside these walls, Sophie was feared as a queen who ruled with greed, willing to drain the life from anyone if it filled her empire with more profit. That day, Max was called into Sophie's private chamber. Her office stood high above the city, looking down on the thousands below like ants crawling on the ground. She welcomed him with a smile that seemed warm, but behind her eyes was only calculation. Max, she said softly, I know what happened with your wife. I heard she gave 40 years of her time. That is quite a sacrifice. Max clenched his fists, holding back his anger. Sophie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But think of it this way. Without sacrifices, this system cannot work. The poor give, the rich thrive, and the world moves forward. You more than anyone should understand this. After all, you are one of my most loyal men. Her words burned in Max's ears. She dared to call his wife's suffering a sacrifice for the greater good. Max bowed his head, hiding the fire in his eyes. That night, when he returned home, he found Alina staring at the mirror, touching her wrinkled face with silent tears. He held her close, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. And in that moment, his vow grew stronger. The corporation would pay. Sophie would pay. Days turned into weeks, and whispers began to spread across the city. Whispers of a rebellion, a hidden group rising in the shadows. They called themselves the Atomum Group. They were men and women who had lost everything to the time trade. Fathers who had sold their years to save their children. Mothers who had given decades only to watch their families starve anyway. They were broken but not defeated. Max listened. He followed the whispers, down into the dark alleys of the city, away from the polished streets of the rich. There, in a forgotten warehouse, he met them. the faces of the rebellion. A man named Jonah stepped forward, his eyes hollow but burning with fire. "You worked for them," Jonah said coldly. "You were their hand, their weapon. Why should we trust you?" Max took a breath, his voice steady but filled with pain. "Because they took everything from me. My wife, my family, my soul. I know how the system works and I know how to break it. If you want to bring them down, you'll need me." The room fell silent. Then slowly Jonah nodded. From that night forward, Max was no longer a loyal servant of the corporation. He had become a soldier of the rebellion. Weeks passed and Max trained with the Adamum group. They taught him how to move unseen, how to hack into the corporation's guarded systems, how to fight not with loyalty, but with fury. For the first time in his life, Max felt purpose. Not the purpose given by Sophie, but the purpose born from loss, from love, and from the will to destroy injustice. Alina, however, was growing weaker. Every day, Max watched her hands tremble a little more, her breath grow shorter, her laughter fade. Time was slipping away from her, not slowly but like sand pouring through broken glass. One night, she whispered to Max, "Promise me. Promise me you will not just fight for revenge. Promise me you will fight for all of us, for every family like ours." Max held her hand tightly, his heart breaking with each word. "I promise," he said. "I swear on every second I have left." And so the rebellion's first mission began. Under the cover of night, Max and Jonah led a small group into one of the corporation's secret vaults. A place where stolen years were stored, locked in glowing capsules that pulsed with human life. Rows upon rows of glass containers stretched into the darkness, each holding the golden essence of time. The rebels stared in awe and fury. "This," Max whispered, "is what they've been taking from us. Not numbers on a screen, real years, real lives trapped like treasures for the rich to buy." They began to take the capsules, stuffing them into bags, determined to return them to the people who had lost everything. But as the rebels worked, alarms suddenly blared through the vault. The walls flashed red and robotic guards poured in. "Go!" Max shouted. "Take what you can and run." The battle that followed was fierce. Blades clashed, gunfire echoed, and the rebels fought like cornered lions. Max, with every strike, saw Sophie's smiling face in his mind. And with every enemy he struck down, his rage grew sharper. In the end, the rebels escaped barely. They carried with them only a fraction of the stolen time, but it was enough to light the fire of hope across the city. For the first time, the poor saw the rebellion as real. Families received years they thought were lost forever. Children smiled as their parents regained youth. The city whispered the name of the Adamum group, and Sophie's empire trembled at the sound. But Sophie was not blind. From her tower, she watched the rebellion grow, and her smile never faltered. If anything, it grew colder. "They think they can steal from me," she murmured. "Let them. Every thief leaves a trail. And when I follow it, I will take more than their years. I will take their souls." Her eyes narrowed as she gave the order. "Find them. Hunt them. And if you must, burn the city to ashes." Sophie's response was swift and brutal. Within days, the city felt the weight of her vengeance. Armored patrols streamed through neighborhoods, checkpoints rose like metal teeth, and the corporation's black vans prowled the streets like hungry beasts. Anyone suspected of sympathy with Adamum vanished in the night. Doors kicked in, families torn apart, homes emptied in the name of national security. Max watched it all from the shadows, the man who had once worn a corporate badge now moving like a ghost through his own city. Every raid, every terrified knock at a door, hardened his resolve. The rebellion had lit a spark. Sophie wanted to snuff it out. Max wanted to turn that spark into a blaze that could not be put out. In the basement of a ruined textile mill, Adamum gathered to plan their next move. Lilith, the group's leader, stood before them, a fierce woman whose jaw had known too many losses. Her voice was a blade as she spoke. "Sophie will not stop until every last one of us is crushed," Lilith said. "So we will stop her first. We take the places they value most, their scientists, their vaults, and their image. We hit hard and we hit true." Max felt both fear and a grim exhilaration. The path ahead would cost lives. That much he knew. But this was the only language the Empire understood. Decisive strikes, public demonstrations, proof that the wealthy were not untouchable. The rebels planned a three-part offensive. First, expose the vaults, publicly broadcast their contents so the world could no longer pretend those years were mere spreadsheet entries. Second, sabotage Sophie's supply lines, cutting off access to the rare tech components that kept the time transfer labs running. Third, and most dangerous, strike at a ceremony where Sophie would be present, to show the world that she could be stopped face to face. Preparations took weeks. Max trained recruits, taught them to move quietly, to hack gates, to disable surveillance. The rebellion grew bolder. The city began to whisper more than just hope. It began to whisper fear for the corporation. But Sophie, sitting high in her tower, was not merely a target to be frightened. She was a strategist. She countered the rebels' moves with a ruthless intelligence, tightening the noose at every turn. The corporation leaked false footage of Adamum atrocities, painted the rebels as terrorists, and turned public sentiment enough to slow the momentum Adamum had gained. People who had once cheered the rebels began to hesitate. Fear crept back into the streets. And then in the darkness between two dawns, word came. The corporation had found a lab where illegal black market transfers were being attempted. A place rumored to be run by a shadowy doctor named David. The company raided the site and in the chaos killed several people. Among the victims were not just criminals, but desperate donors and low-level technicians. The massacre was quick, merciless, and it sent a chill through even the most hardened members of the rebellion. Lilith's eyes burned with fury at the news. "They'll think blood will cow us," she spat. "They don't understand, blood makes us stronger." Max listened, but a new worry gnawed at him. The line between rebellion and revenge was thinning. He had sworn to save his wife and to save others like her, not to become the mirror image of those he hated. Despite the risk, their plans moved forward. The night of the public exposure arrived. Atomum's hackers hijacked the city's largest broadcast network and streamed footage stolen from inside a vault. Rows of glowing capsules, faces frozen in repose, names and lifespans attached like inventory tags. The image cut through the city like lightning. Gasps echoed in living rooms and cafes, in the expensive lounges at the top of Sophie's tower. People could no longer call these things abstract. They were human years taken and caged. For a moment it felt like victory. Protests surged, outraged citizens demanded answers, while the corporation scrambled to control the narrative with denials and counterclaims. But Sophie's retribution arrived like a storm. She announced a citywide emergency, deployed more forces, and called the rebellion criminals who traffic in human lives. Her words were a shield for her brutal actions. Max watched protests turn into brutal clashes. He saw faces he recognized fall under batons and rubber bullets. He saw a mother press a small stolen capsule to her chest and cry as soldiers tore it away. The moral clarity he had hoped for blurred under the violence. The world he wanted to create, where years were not currency to be traded, suddenly demanded choices that cost everything. That night, as he sheltered the exhausted rebels back in the old textile mill, Max thought of Alina's hand, thin and trembling. He thought of the promise he had made beside her mirror, and he realized the war would not end until Sophie's system was dismantled stone by stone. But to dismantle an empire, sometimes you must first be willing to tear down everything that looks like it. The city was on fire. Not with flames but with fear, with anger, with suspicion. Streets filled with armored convoys, drones humming overhead like restless hornets, and posters plastered on walls declaring Atomum a terrorist network. Max moved through it all unseen but not untouched. Every checkpoint, every desperate cry, every shattered window left another scar inside him. He had joined the rebellion to save lives, not drown the city in endless cycles of blood. Lilith, however, saw only opportunity in the chaos. "The protests are our shield," she told the group one night in the dim glow of lanterns. "While Sophie fights the people in the streets, we strike at her heart. We take her scientists, we break her labs. We show her the empire is rotting." Her voice was steel. Many cheered, but Max hesitated. To strike at scientists, many of them slaves to Sophie's system themselves, felt like crossing into darker territory. Yet he knew silence would mean watching others decide the course without him. So he spoke. "If we become like her, if we kill those who are forced to serve, we've already lost. We need to draw a line, or we're no better than Sophie." The room was divided. Some muttered agreement, others glared. Lilith's stare lingered on him, sharp and unreadable. Still, plans moved forward. Atomum began preparing for the second phase, cutting Sophie's supply lines. Max and a small unit infiltrated a warehouse at the city's edge where imported components for the transfer machines were stored. It was a fortress of steel crates and security drones. Yet, under the cover of blackout, Max's team slipped inside, planting EMP charges. The blast was thunderous. Sparks rained like shooting stars. Dozens of irreplaceable components melted into useless metal. It was a blow Sophie could not ignore. The next day, her response was terrifying in its precision. She didn't just tighten security. She unveiled something new, the Sentinel program. Towering humanoid machines, built to patrol the streets and identify rebels by biometric traces. Faster than humans, stronger than humans, and utterly loyal. The first demonstration was broadcast live. A captured rebel brought before a crowd, scanned and neutralized in seconds. The message was clear. Resistance was no longer fighting soldiers. It was fighting monsters. Fear swept through Atomum's ranks. Some considered fleeing the city entirely. Others wanted to escalate, to attack harder, to bleed Sophie's empire before the Sentinels could multiply. Max wrestled with doubt. The more they fought, the more ruthless Sophie became. And yet, he remembered Alina's fading smile, remembered the vault filled with stolen years. Stopping now would mean surrendering her life, and the lives of thousands like her, to a system built on cruelty. In the dead of night, Max returned to the textile mill. He found Lilith staring at maps, her hands trembling though her voice was calm. "She's turning us into the villains in people's eyes," Lilith whispered. "Every move we make, she paints it blacker than it is. If we don't give them a spectacle, something undeniable, they'll turn away from us completely." Max knew what she meant. The third phase, the most dangerous of all, the strike at Sophie's public ceremony, a gala meant to celebrate the corporation's progress toward a brighter future. If they pulled it off, Sophie would no longer look untouchable. If they failed, Adamum would be annihilated. Max closed his eyes, hearing Alina's voice in his memory. "Promise me you'll fight for us." When he opened them again, the decision was already made. The rebellion would go to the gala, and Max would be at its heart. The night of the gala was drenched in artificial light. Gleaming towers shimmered like crystal blades, holographic banners rippled in the air, and guests in glittering attire flowed into Sophie's palace of mirrors. Music played, a symphony of triumph masking the undercurrent of fear that pulsed through the city. Inside, Sophie stood radiant, her smile like polished ice. To the crowd, she was salvation wrapped in silk. To Adamum, she was a thief who fed on stolen lives. Max slipped in disguised as a servant. His heart pounded as he carried a silver tray, weaving between laughing dignitaries and flashing cameras. Hidden in the folds of his uniform lay the key, a small detonator linked to the charges Adamum had planted beneath the gala hall. But destruction wasn't the plan. Not yet. Their aim was exposure, proof of Sophie's crimes, enough to fracture the illusion of her empire before the entire city. Lilith's voice crackled softly in Max's earpiece. "Stay calm. Phase 1 begins when I say. Remember, our weapon tonight is the truth." As the ceremony reached its height, Sophie raised her glass. "Tonight," she declared, "we celebrate not only progress, but the dawn of a new era. An era where no one must fear disease, no one must fear death." The crowd erupted in applause. But Max's hand clenched around the detonator. The words were poison, twisted promises built on graves. Then it happened. The screens behind Sophie flickered, hacked by Adamum. Images spilled across the walls. The vault of machines, rows of drained bodies, faces of men and women who had been reduced to husks for the sake of her empire. Gas spread like wildfire. "No," Sophie snapped, her calm shattering. "This is fabrication. Lies." But the truth had already struck. Murmurs turned to shouts. Guests staggered back, some covering their mouths in horror, others glaring at Sophie with dawning realization. Security stormed in. Gunfire cracked. The gala dissolved into chaos. Max abandoned the tray, sprinting toward the central console to keep the feed alive. Sparks lit the air as bullets struck marble columns. He dove, rolled, and slammed his palm onto the control pad, forcing the broadcast to every screen in the city. For a moment, just one perfect moment, the truth was unstoppable. Every citizen saw the horror Sophie had hidden. Every family recognized the stolen faces. And then the sentinels arrived. Glass shattered as towering metal giants crashed into the hall. Their glowing eyes scanned the room, locking instantly on Max and the rebels. Screams tore through the gala as the sentinels moved with terrifying speed. "Fall back." Lilith's voice thundered in his ear. "We've done what we came for. Get out." Max fought through the storm, dodging claws of steel and shoving panicked dignitaries aside. His chest burned, his breath ragged, but his grip on the detonator never wavered. At the last moment, as he stumbled toward the exit, he looked back. Sophie stood at the stage, untouched, her face twisted in fury. For the first time, her mask had slipped, and the world had seen the monster underneath. The rebels escaped into the night. Behind them, the gala burned. But Max knew this was only the beginning. The truth was out, and Sophie would stop at nothing to crush them for it. The city was no longer the same after the gala. Screens replayed the leaked footage on every corner. Whispers spread through every crowded market, and doubt gnawed at the walls of Sophie's empire. Some citizens rallied in outrage, demanding answers, demanding justice. Others clung to Sophie's lies, terrified of admitting the truth. And in between, chaos bloomed. Protests turned violent. Neighbors accused neighbors. The city was cracking, and Sophie sharpened her claws on those fractures. Her sentinels patrolled day and night, dragging suspected rebels from their homes. Loudspeakers blared her voice. "Trust me, and you will be safe. Stand against me, and you will vanish." Fear was now a living thing in the air, heavy and choking. Adamum had become both infamous and hunted. Safe houses were raided, supply routes cut, and whispers of betrayal began to ripple inside the rebellion itself. Max carried the weight of it all like chains around his shoulders. He had lit the fire, but now the flames threatened to consume everyone. Still, he held on to Alina's memory, to the faces of those still trapped in Sophie's machines. That was the anchor that stopped him from drowning. One evening, deep in the ruins of an abandoned subway, Adamum gathered. The rebels were bruised, bloody, but unbroken. Lilith stood before them, her cloak torn, her voice steady despite the shadows in her eyes. "We gave them truth," she said, "and truth cannot be killed. Sophie can hunt us, she can silence some of us, but she cannot erase what the world has seen." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd, yet fear lingered sharp, unspoken. Max stepped forward. His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as he spoke. "She knows we're not afraid to die. That's why she'll try something worse, to break us from the inside, to turn us against each other. We cannot let her." If we do, then Alina, then all of them, will have suffered for nothing. The silence that followed was heavy. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then slowly fists rose into the air. The fire reignited, fragile but alive. That night, as Max sat alone on the edge of the subway platform, Lilith joined him. The dim lantern light flickered across her face, revealing exhaustion beneath her iron mask. "You've changed," she said quietly. "When I first found you, you were just a boy chasing vengeance. Now you're something else. A leader whether you want it or not." Max looked at her, the words catching in his throat. "I never asked for this," he whispered. "None of us did," Lilith replied. "But sometimes the world chooses for us." A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, sentinels sweeping nearby streets. Both of them fell silent, listening to the metallic growl fade. In that silence, Max realized something chilling. Sophie was adapting faster than they were. If Adamam didn't strike harder, smarter, soon the rebellion would not survive the next storm. And Sophie's storm was already gathering. The storm came at dawn. A roar of engines, the pounding of boots, the cold gleam of sentinels as they marched into the city's underbelly. Sophie had found Adamam's hiding place. Explosions ripped through the subway tunnels. Dust rained from the ceilings as rebels scrambled for cover. The underground safe house, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield of fire and steel. Max shouted orders, his throat raw. "Move! Protect the wounded! Keep the exit clear!" His voice cut through the chaos like a blade, steady even as fear clawed at his chest. The sentinels pressed forward, unstoppable. Their glowing eyes pierced the smoke, their metal fists smashed through walls, their scanners locked on every heartbeat in the dark. Rebels fell one by one. Sparks lit the shadows. Blood mixed with the dust. Yet Adamam did not retreat without a fight. Makeshift bombs ignited, collapsing tunnels and slowing the mechanical beasts. In the heart of the battle, Max found himself face to face with one of the towering machines. Its claws swung down, and he barely rolled aside, the impact shattering stone where he had stood. With trembling hands, he pulled an EMP grenade from his belt, slammed it against the sentinel's chest, and dove back as it erupted in a storm of crackling light. The machine collapsed, twitching and sparking before falling still. For one fleeting moment, victory seemed possible. But then came the voice. Sophie's voice. It echoed through the rebels' comms, calm and cruel. "You think you've hurt me? You think exposing my vault has weakened me? No, you've given me power. Now the people beg for my protection. Beg for my sentinels to cleanse the streets. You are not saviors. You are the plague." Her words were knives. Some rebels faltered, their spirits breaking even as they fought. Max clenched his fists, teeth grinding. "No," he growled under his breath. "You're the plague. And we'll cure you." The battle raged for hours. By the time the rebels finally broke through an escape route, nearly half of Adamam had fallen. The survivors stumbled into the pale morning light, their bodies battered, their hearts heavy with loss. They regrouped in the ruins of an old cathedral, its stained glass windows shattered, its altar scarred by time. There Lilith stood before them, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "This is not the end," she declared. Her voice trembled but did not break. "Every empire bleeds before it falls. Sophie is bleeding. And we are still alive." The rebels raised their fists weakly, some weeping, some too exhausted to speak. Max stepped aside, gazing at the rising sun through the broken glass. He thought of Alina again, her smile, her plea. And he knew no matter how much it cost, the fight could not end here. But deep inside he felt it, the weight of destiny pressing heavier than ever. This war was no longer just survival, it was a reckoning. And Sophie had made it personal. The days that followed were a blur of ash and silence. Adamam had been broken, scattered across the city like dying embers. Every corner they once held was now patrolled by sentinels, every whisper hunted by Sophie's eyes. But even in the ruins, the flame refused to die. Max gathered the survivors, fewer than ever before, their faces hollow but their resolve sharper than steel. In the cathedral's shadow, he spoke to them. "Sophie thinks this is over. She thinks fear has won. But she forgets one thing: fear is temporary. Hope can outlast empires." His words lit something inside the weary rebels. Not a roar of triumph, but a quiet fire, steady and unyielding. Lilith approached him after the meeting, her voice low. "We can't keep running, Max. We can't keep bleeding in the shadows. There's only one way left." Max knew what she meant before she said it. The final strike. The heart of Sophie's fortress. The place where the transfer machines pulsed like veins of a monstrous body. It was madness, but it was also the only chance they had left. Plans were drawn in whispers, maps sketched in dust, weapons scavenged from ruins. Every rebel knew the risk, and none turned away. The night before the mission, Max sat alone beneath the shattered arches of the cathedral. The moonlight spilled across the floor, painting the ruins in silver. He closed his eyes and imagined Alina beside him. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "I don't know if I'll even live to see the end." But in his memory, her voice was gentle, steady. "You don't need to live to win. You just need to make sure they live after you. When dawn came, Adama moved like shadows through the broken streets. They carried no banners, no songs, only silence and the promise of freedom. At the edge of Sophie's fortress, Max looked up at the towering walls, the lights that cut across the sky, the endless hum of machines. Felt impossible. And yet it was the only path left. Lilith stood beside him, her hand tightening around her weapon. "Whatever happens," she said, "we end this tonight." Max nodded, his heart steady at last. The rebellion marched forward, into the lion's den, into the final storm. The fortress was alive with the sound of machines. Endless corridors glowed with cold blue light, humming with power drawn from the countless lives trapped within Sophie's vault. Each chamber pulsed like a heartbeat, each wall whispering of suffering unseen. Adamum struck fast. Explosions tore through gates, rebels swarmed the halls, and for the first time, Sophie's empire felt a sting of desperation. Sentinels clashed with rebels in a storm of sparks and steel, the air heavy with the smell of smoke and blood. Max led the charge. Every step he took echoed with Alina's memory, every swing of his weapon driven by the faces of the stolen. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, and everything left to protect. At the heart of the fortress, Sophie awaited them. She stood draped in shadow, her eyes burning with fury and pride. Around her the largest transfer machine loomed, its core glowing like a false sun. "You think you can end me?" she sneered, her voice carrying above the battle. "I am not a woman. I am an idea. I am eternity." Max stepped forward, chest heaving, blood streaking his arm. "No," he shouted back. "You're a parasite, and parasites don't last forever." Their battle was a storm. Sophie fought with precision and power, wielding weapons built from the very machines she commanded. Max countered with fury and grit, each strike fueled by the rebellion's final hope. Steel clashed. Sparks flew. The fortress trembled. At last, Sophie struck him down, forcing him to his knees. Her laughter rang cold. "You cannot kill me, Max. Even if you destroy this body, my legacy lives in every machine, every loyal heart outside these walls." But Max still held the detonator. His thumb hovered over it, trembling. Behind him, the surviving rebels shouted, fighting to hold back the sentinels long enough for him to choose. He looked up at Sophie, and for a moment, he almost saw Alina's face, pale, fading, begging him not to give up. Max pressed the detonator. The explosion ripped through the fortress like the wrath of the earth itself. Machines screamed, walls crumbled, and the false sun at the heart of the chamber shattered into blinding light. Sophie's cry was swallowed by the roar of destruction, and then silence. When the dust settled, the fortress was gone. The sentinels had fallen. The machines lay twisted and broken. Sophie's empire, built on stolen lives, had finally collapsed. Among the ruins, only a handful of rebels stood, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Max was among them, his body battered, his vision fading. He sank to his knees, staring at the rising dawn beyond the wreckage. For the first time in years, the sky looked pure, free. Lilith came to his side, her voice trembling. "You did it, Max. You gave them back their future." Max smiled faintly, the weight at last lifting from his shoulders. "It wasn't me," he whispered. "It was all of us." Then as the sun rose higher, Max closed his eyes, and the world, scarred, broken but reborn, breathed free again.